distinguished guests from the diaspora, welcome to the Gambia and to the first program in the 10th edition of the International Roots Festival. I just want to welcome the Honorable Ministers here present. I'm the Honorable Minister for Finance and Economic Affairs. You are most welcome. We also have the Honorable Minister for Trade and Industry. You are most welcome. We've also got Honorable Minister of Tourism and Culture, who is our host, for the next 7 days. Aja Fatuma Chuk. As is my boss, so I'll take the pleasure to call her by her full name. And of course, we have the Permanent Secretary Minister of Tourism and Culture. You're most welcome. And the Vice Chancellor of the University of the Gambia, Professor Ka, who is also here with us today. And we also have, the Doyen historian, Mr. Bakari Sidibe, our mentor, who is also here with us. So to all of you and to others, and distinguished personalities, we say good evening and welcome. I will leave the chairman for the occasion, Mr. Marcel Tomasi, to take charge of the rest of the evening. So thank you very much and welcome.
Honorable Ministers of the Government of the Gambia, particularly the Honorable Minister for Tourism and Culture, who, as you heard earlier, is the hostess of this very grand festival, a distinguished array of panelists. We celebrate culture. You need to reduce it a little bit more. We celebrate culture, as I said, in accordance with the theme for this year's Root Festival, which is celebrating African unity. Arts and culture, as I said, is the bedrock of African unity. And arts and culture is one of the glories of human intellectual tradition. This is why tonight's symposium serves as an adequate curtain raiser for the Roots Homecoming Festival, which takes place from the 4th, that is today, to the 11th of February 2011. And as you have been told, it is the 10th edition. By way of a reminder, I just want to remind you, lest you forget, that the Roots Festival was established in 1996 by no other person than His Excellency, the President of the Republic of the Gambia, Sheikh Professor Alhaji Dr. Yahya AJJ Jammeh, who has since then made personal efforts to sustain, widen and diversify the context of the Roots Homecoming Festival. But then, lest you also forget, we remind you about the original aims of the festival, which were, among others, to commemorate the suffering and the end result of the liberation of the transatlantic slave trade, to promote national culture and heritage, to restore the African identity, dignity and personality, and to enhance land. So Call to the Land, in a sense, was also a cultural initiative. When he established in after, the Call to the Land is a post-clarion call, because the root is embedded in the land, and without land, you cannot grow roots. Today we have an excellent and distinguished array of panelists, each in his own specific way. I will introduce them one by one, But then the very first speaker, the very first panelist, from now on I'll be chairman. I will not stand here in this podium. So I'll maintain my seat on the chair because I've forgot.
Honorable Ministers, Vice Chancellor, brothers and sisters from the diaspora, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great honor and a privilege to be invited here on this occasion and present a paper and share our thoughts on the development of our dear continent, Africa. Since it is about Roots Homecoming Festival, and I was asked to present a paper, I first thought of maybe something that is really directly linked with roots. And since my area of specialization is literature, Gambian literature for that matter, I thought that maybe it will be good to look at it from a literary perspective and see the Gambian response of Alex Haley's book, Roots, and with my brother's book, Mr. Nadagir Johnson, the other speaker, who wrote Eye of Ebony, which is a national response to Haley's book, Roots, where Kunta Kinte, unlike what happened in Haley's book, Roots, will resist the deportation or the being captured and sent to the plantation. So, but then I decided maybe since the author is also among the panelists, maybe let me look at it from another angle, since I'm also a linguist. So I thought of revisiting African education for African development through indigenous African languages. Moving into the 21st century and the world becoming more globalized than ever before, the African has a responsibility to create a developmental paradigm to pave the way for socio-economic progress. In this process, Africans must begin to decide and design a development strategy that is African, based on African education through African languages and responsive to the needs of the African as Africans' response to globalization. How do we achieve this? We need to reconceptualize our education, reconnect to our culture and languages, and most critically, to design an indigenous educational paradigm that is linked to African languages and realities. This implies that Africans must start to take ownership of their own education, not in isolation, but within the global context of new technological flows and information orders. In Decolonizing the Mind, the Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o argues that the control of the African mind during the transatlantic slave trade and colonial periods was done through the devaluation at best and destruction at worst of the African people's culture, art, dances, religions, history, geography, education, and literature. Most crucial, of course, was the domination of the African languages by the languages of the colonial masters, which was in turn crucial to the domination of the mental universe of the Africans. Our culture and history are rich in their scientific exploitation. Our popularization is a sure path to progress and survival. Let me cite just one example from the Gambia. Our culture places high premium of the respect of the integrity of women, marriage to ensure harmony and procreation, and the expansion of the family. Before colonialism, venereal diseases were almost unknown in the Gambia, and the integrity of Gambian cultural values that have been transmitted to this present generation explains why the HIV/AIDS prevalence rate in this country is among the lowest in Africa. We should not define wealth in terms of money alone. Our culture and tradition is also our wealth, and we are inviting academics to explore further into the intrinsic cultural morality of traditional Gambians. Why should the colonizers not be jealous of us and struggle to control us? It is evident that the continued effort to control the African mind by controlling his language is so young. Yet, in the 21st century, it is not surprising to find Africans dismissing any recognition of positive experiences in African history. When an African conspires to denigrate Africa and her glorious past while admiring and eulogizing the totality of Eurocentrism, there is definitely a mental and developmental problem. And Shanta Diop was among those who were victimized because of the thoughts that were developed in those days. The role of the African people in taking the lead in designing the development of their societies through African-centered education by using African indigenous languages is central to Africa's socio-economic development. Africans must start to take ownership of their own educational systems so that they find solutions to Africa's myriad problems. Indeed, our continent is confronted with a plethora of mammoth problems and challenges that permeate through every single fabric of our human lives, from health, education, socio-economic, political, to name just a few. The prominent African once somberly summarized the African situation thus: once a region with rich national resources, as well as bountiful stores of optimism and hope, the African continent now teeters perilously on the brink of economic disintegration, political chaos, institutional and social decay, when you observe what happens in the Maghreb nowadays, and in Darfur and so on and so forth. We tend to agree with this scholar. While this appraisal of Africa might seem too depressing, very few of us here would disagree with this observation that Africa has been experiencing regression rather than progress, not only in the economic sphere, but also in the socio-political spheres. It is against this backdrop that it is deemed necessary to rethink, revisit, and reconceptualize education in Africa to contribute to the socio-political and economic transformation of the continent. As we all are aware, Western education, with its Eurocentric composition, was brought to Africa by the colonialists through the church. Another prominent scholar on African studies also observed that that colonial education was Eurocentric and ignored the achievements and contributions of the indigenous populations and their ancestries, and that education in Africa is still struggling to rid itself of this colonial legacy. It is time for Africans to liberate themselves from this Eurocentric colonial legacy where meaningful development can be achieved. This can only be done by underpinning African education in African indigenous cultures and languages as a tool for socio-political transformation. Strictly speaking, there is a strong nexus between language, education, and development. It is indeed true that development in any country has to do with the improvement of the social, cultural, economic, and political lives of the people. However, the focal point of this paper will be confined to the nexus between language, education, socio-economic development, and the international environment. It should be noted that there is evidence pointing to the fact that the correlation between language, education, and economic development, and this lies in the nexus between language and education on the one hand, and education and development on the other, all evolving with a given international context. It is axiomatic that language plays a critical role in education. Once again, the Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o identifies two aspects of every language. One is its role as an agent that enables us to communicate with one another in our struggle to find our means of survival. The other aspect is its role as a carrier of the history and the culture built into the process of that communication over time. The two aspects, he concludes, are inseparable linked as they form a dialectical unity, describing language as the collective memory bank of a people. Going back to the role of language in education and consequently development, I have earlier emphasized the role of language in education. It is through language that knowledge is produced through the interaction between teachers and the learners, and among the learners themselves. Certainly, language learning proper, Bunyi argues, is an important component of the education itself. Accordingly, much of the child's early years in school are spent on developing their linguistic skills. Such years are said to be spent on literacy development. Being one of the most multilingual continents, and therefore the most linguistically complex area of the world, post-colonial Africa needs to revisit and re-examine what type of literacy must support our policies as regards indigenous languages in education. The relationship between literacy and economic development has already been confirmed and established, and UNESCO has concluded in a study that illiteracy has a close correlation with poverty and underdevelopment. This suggests that in order to achieve meaningful development, literacy rates in Africa, especially south of the Sahara,
Good 5 minutes.
thank you, must be raised. Needless to say, policies as regards indigenous languages in education will have a positive impact on the success of African development. Don't worry, I'll be able to finish before that. The spread of languages such as English, French, and Portuguese concomitant with the advent of colonialism. Consequently, the educational role of these various languages has been arguably more destructive than constructive. Furthermore, whether through practice or by attitudes, the colonial languages have come to enjoy unparalleled pride and prestige in formal education in Africa. Ironically, it is African indigenous languages that have been and continue to be neglected in the formal education in Africa. As long as the denigration and devaluation of the African indigenous languages continue, no meaningful development can take place in the continent. It is therefore time Africans domesticated African educational institutions by creating a strong relationship between indigenous languages and education for the purpose of socio-economic development. This, combined with the use of ICTs as tools, can be fruitful in the drive to achieve new goals as set out in the 21st century agenda. Indigenizing education needs a total social re-engineering, and it is not only vital but also immensely necessary if Africans want to promote and effect socio-cultural change and to meet educational needs for socio-economic development. To achieve this, indigenous African languages should be given a more central role in education in Africa so as to contribute to the much needed social, economic, and political transformations. We are aware of the enormity and difficulty of this task because of Africa's socio-linguistic complexity. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, language is constantly evolving, and the language question in Africa today must take into consideration its utility and its integration into regional, continental, supranational institutions. Language as an instrument of development should serve the African and not the other way around. I thank you.
Why when I start with foreign minister, we say also as panelist, or the line minister, honorable minister for culture and tourism, distinguished guests. Come in. I was invited without an invitation, and I noticed that I was qualified as diplomat and historian. Then I thought it was going to be a dilemma because historians, diplomats are historians, but sometimes historians and diplomats don't see the same issues from the same lenses. However, I will try to be more specific because I have colleagues here who are versed in other areas like Pan-Africanism and the history of something. So I'll kick off with two fundamental postulates. Firstly, the origin of man has been scientifically traced back to Africa. Therefore, the entirety of humanity comes from a common ancestry. The second postulate is that our ancestors migrated from the fertile Nile Valley to different parts of Africa, north, south, east, and west. And for the purpose of this presentation, we need to recall that our West African sub-region might have been forced that to our ancestors came to the West African region because they might have been forced by political or economic circumstances to migrate westwards across the Sahara Desert until they reached the eastern confines of the Senegambia Valley, a land's end bordering the Atlantic. In the particular case of West Africa, especially in the Sudan-Saharan area, we were one community under successive empires and states or kingdoms, of which the most prominent were the Ghana, Mali, and Songhai empires from the 9th to the 13th centuries, and nearer home in the Senegambian space, Gabu, Bawol, and Kajor, Sinin, Salum, Futa, Fonyi, Fuladu, Kombo, from the 17th to the 19th century. The historic realities these historic realities constitute the first real steps of Pan-Africanism, and particularly integration in West Africa, leading to initiatives and unions, associations culminating in the birth of the OAU and ECOWAS. Colonialism and its impact. Much has been justifiably attributed to difference in colonial past as a major obstacle to integration. However, this has to be qualified and rationally weighted against other considerations which have been amply covered in this document. The question must be asked, if Senegal and Gambia were both French or British, would integration have been any easier if other factors of size, difference in political evolution, etc. were absent? This brings to mind the Mali Federation. Here we had two countries colonized by France and in fact administered as one entity, ROF, with the central government in Dakar under a governor general assisted by territorial governors in individual countries. There were common services which meant civil servants, military officers, teachers, medical personnel could be posted anywhere in the ROF. This was particularly prevalent between Senegal and Sudan, whereas the former provided public officers who were posted to French Sudan. Many soldiers in the colony of Senegal came from Sudan. Sudanese and Senegalese sat together in the federal parliament in Dakar. To this extent, Senegal and Sudan, Francais, were integrated in a very advanced manner. In addition, Houphouët-Boigny, who had become the leader of and patron of FDR, which had a majority following the RF countries, West African French countries, was not keen about the creation of Mali. In fact, he virtually forced out Benin, Togo, and Upper Volta, initially adherents to the Mali scheme, out, leaving Senegal and Sudan in what would have otherwise been a 5-state federation. The Conseil d'Entente, comprising Côte d'Ivoire, Togo, Dahomey, and Upper Volta, was set up. The Cameroon case is interesting, as it is about the only post-independence union in Africa that has survived, even though it was a federation which involved the larger French-speaking East and the disproportionately small Anglophone West. But this arrangement was the result of the 1961 UN plebiscite, which also enabled the northern part to join the Federation of Nigeria. Notwithstanding, the union has altered in character in that the smaller, mainly English-speaking West has been absorbed into the unitary Cameroonian state. In that sense, integration has been achieved, perhaps at the expense of unity, but many in this area, if not the majority, continue to this day to be unhappy about this outcome, which they intermittently challenge whenever the opportunity arises. From colonialism to independence and nationhood, the colonial system was confronted by the Pan-African movement of the early 20th century, a period destabilized by 2 world wars, and inspired initially by Dubois from the United States. The 5th Pan-African Conference was a major land benchmark. This was preceded by the 1920 National Congress of West Africa, attended by Gambian Edward Small. He formed the Gambian chapter on his return to the Gambia. Small was a promoter of Senegambia on political exile in Rufus near Dakar, from where he continued to publish his newspaper, the Gambian Outlook, and Senegambian Report from 1922 to 1927, interacting at the same time with very well-known Senegalese politicians, political leaders such as Blaise Diagne and Gallatin Diouf, respectively, who were the first African deputies sitting in the French Assembly in France. And for more details, you have to read Nana Johnson's book, Edward Small, Watchdog of the Gambia, published in 2002. The mantle of Pan-African was inherited by Kwame Nkrumah, who led the Gold Coast to independence in 1957 and convened in Accra the first conference of independent African states. The historic meeting was the prelude to the creation of the OAU in 1963, which became the AU in 2000. The principal objective was, 1, the total liberation of Africa, and 2, the unification of Africa. While the former has been achieved, the latter has not actually been a great success story. Now, if you take again Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, we are talking of common languages and heritages. Not only were they colonized by Portugal, which administered the 2 states as one entity, their people moved and worked freely in the 2 countries despite the vast expanse of water that separate them. In fact, Cape Verde is close to Senegal and the Gambia in the north, just as Guinea-Bissau is close to Senegal, Casamance, and the Gambia in the south. Furthermore, the liberation struggle was a joint effort under the PAIGC led by Amilcar Cabral. While as one team they defeated the Portuguese, with independence, the 2 countries became separate sovereign states who became separate states. The current political instability of Guinea-Bissau can be traced to this fact, A lesson that should be evident from the failure of the Senegambian Federation and the Mali Federation is the difficulty of integration where only 2 states are involved, particularly when relative size, whether physical, demographic, or economic, is disproportionate. The first Nigerian Federation suffered this constraint as power was so preponderant in favor of the North, which was as big as, if not larger than Eastern and Western Nigeria put together. What followed was Biafra, and now is ancient history. And despite balancing acts through the forging of a federation of about 40 states, after other disunities still threaten Nigeria's cohesion and stability. Now let me come to the Senegambian Confederation to be more focused. The Senegambian experience clearly reflects the problems involved in promoting cooperation and integration between African countries with different colonial inheritances. A number of comments arise from this experience. First, by any standard, Gambia and Senegal, geographically contiguous, constitute one.
You have 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes. Okay, I have to rush. In the particular case of Senegal, the commonalities are so many and solid, but for other exogenous factors, it stands out as the ideal setting for integration in Africa. In November 1958, a newspaper in the Gambia said, this was the Vanguard, should we in the Gambia not be careful about our future relations with the Senegalese who are the same as us, Gambians? Let us take away the words Senegal and Gambia, and we are left with Serer, Wolof, Mandinka, Sarahole, Fula, and Jola. We have the same languages, the same religions, and we belong to the same ethnic groups. This cannot be removed, whereas the boundary between the Gambia and Senegal is very artificial. This is a quotation from the Vanguard in 1958. I have to rush through because we also have religion which binds us. Islam is the predominant religion, with not less than 90% of Senegambia being Muslims. Now, I will rush on to, because we don't have time, ECOWAS. ECOWAS has achieved much less since its creation in 1975, nearly 40 years ago. Granted, visas are no longer required. Traveling in the sub-region and the brown card for traveling to the sub-region and the brown card insurance facilitates interstate travel. But there is no real free movement of ordinary West Africans, not to speak of the right of establishment. Sometimes you go to other African countries and you are treated almost on the same basis as people from Europe and Asia. But ECOWAS needs to do more. We need some criteria that we make. Firstly, there must be internal unity and peace in individual states, many of whom are or have been locked in inter-ethnic or interfaith conflicts. Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Nigeria, Sudan, Rwanda, etc., to name a few. The logic here is that if there is no internal tolerance and harmonious coexistence between the diverse groups that make up our individual countries, how will it be possible to be hospitable to those who come from other Eastern African countries? The one of saying is that when it's said that Sweden nit bana, that you're like in the Bokayakowa, for one cannot love others more than one's own relatives. After all, charity begins at home. The problem is that few African countries have the fundamental attributes of a modern state. The second criterion is poor state of infrastructure interstate highways where they exist. To achieve free movement of people, goods and services, there must be an efficient transport and communication system. In this regard, there must be good roads, network linking all neighboring ECOWAS countries and those linked in different sub-regions, and the abolition or substantial simplification of customs and immigration along the numerous artificial borders that surround individual countries. Other equally important transport modes, maritime and air, must be developed jointly, even beyond what it was in colonial times. Let me just conclude by saying that if you 3 minutes, that is very important.
It's okay. I'll give you only an additional minute.
Actually, it's the Gambia that has emerged really as the ECOWAS African model. This is a country where all people from West Africa work and live harmoniously with the Gambians. In fact, sometimes I wonder whether Gambians will not soon be a minority in their own country. And yet, we are still hospitable. But what have we been integrating? I strongly believe that integration must be about people. Like development, the people must be the subject and object of integration. We can only last if it's based on a bottom-up paradigm as opposed to the familiar vertical approach. In the particular case of Senegambia, it's fortunate that people of the two countries have always been integrated and remain integrated whatever the state of relations at the institutional level. Frontiers only concern the Western educated elite like me and you, us, who can read maps, but the vast majority of Gambian Senegalese have never been confronted with this mindset imposed in Berlin at the end of the 19th century. People who were related by blood, fathers and mothers, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, woke up one morning and found themselves separated as foreigners and aliens to one another. Therefore, I think we should really find objectives of integration. Given past experience characterized by failure, perhaps the time has come for a close examination of fundamental integration issues. I believe that integration needs to have been the victim of straitjacket paradigms which focus disproportionately on institutions and not on people. Where have these failed? As in most all cases, the general conclusion is that integration is impossible. That's where there are institutional difficulties. Both the Senegambian and Malikon were heavily bogged down by institutional drawbacks. In this framework, much emphasis was placed on meetings and agreements, diplomatically nice communiques. I was involved. But the publicity otherwise of interactions between institutions become the parameter for the measurement of success or failure of whatever arrangements were made. Because of the same as the personalities and rivalry between Senghor and Modibo Keita did not help the Mali Confederation. But is integration really only about institutions, important as they may be, or is it not about ordinary people? The vacuum of interstate civil society organizations, NGOs, trans-border town-to-town, village-to-village cooperation, regular sports competitions, a trans-border soccer league, and wrestling confederation could help. Let me close this Senegambian section with an interesting anecdote. In the Senegalese paper, Le Quotidien, of 6 September 2010, let me read, it's very important. There was a strange but interesting article entitled Communauté rurale de Kër Samba Gueye, il devient Sénégalais, après avoir être Gambien. I know that you misunderstand what I'm saying. In other words, he's saying they became Senegalese, they became again Senegalese after having been Gambians. Briefly, this is about a group of villages in Yambatu, just near the Nyomi border. It's finished, right? On the Senegalese side of Oponyomi, without any road and cut off from the rest of Senegal during the rainy season by waterlogged flood plains. So according to the paper, I'm quoting from this paper, Senegal Quotidien, and if anybody is interested, I can give you the copy. Maybe I can give it to the minister first. But I know that he's an avid reader. I'm sure he reads all the papers. So according to the paper, they became Gambians out of necessity, although they lived on the other side. They sent their children to the nearest Gambian school and attend Gambian health centers, while their youth looked for employment across the border in the Gambia, 3 kilometers away. They shopped in the Gambia, and the Gambian dollars became their currency. Even their groundnuts were sold in the Gambia, where many of them also had farms. Now a bridge has been built connecting the locality with the rest of Senegal, but habits die hard. And these Senegalese will continue to behave like Gambians in spite of their new bridge. This is an interesting story. And along this whole border, in the Foynes, in Fuladus, in Salums, in Nyani, this is a reality. In conclusion, celebrating African unity. Have we got anything to celebrate? How much progress since OA was created in 1963, 50 years ago, or since ECOWAS was created about 40 years ago? Unions have been forged and broken. Federations and countries have been hastily created only to die sudden deaths. It's difficult to travel from state to state in Africa. Sometimes, as I said, one is treated like a complete foreigner, on the same footing as visitors from other continents like Europe, and sometimes they even treat the Europeans better, with few exceptions. It's ECOWAS, because we have the ECOWAS arrangements. We are not trading amongst ourselves. I believe Yusufa and Mambure would confirm, I think between maybe less than 10%. Our exchanges. Unless this situation changes, there is little to celebrate about. But there is hope in that history is on our side. Our ancestors under the great empires I have already mentioned lived together as one entity. Africa has been liberated from colonialism for about 50 years now, meaning that we are free to decide for ourselves in what we do. That was what Nkrumah said. The beauty of independence is that for once you are free to say no or yes, and to do what you want, whether it's right or wrong. It was not for the colonists to tell you what to do. We have the will to change. Yes, we can bring about change and unite our continent and its people. It's not an exclusive government enterprise. You, we, and all have a role to play in this process. Thank you.
The first government to publish a weekly magazine called...
His name is Gray Johnson, and I tried to develop the nom de plume Nana Humasi. It didn't work, and the Gray Johnson bit overwhelmed the Humasi bit, so I returned to my Gray Johnson name. Ladies and gentlemen, my task this evening is very simple. I am going to speak to certain points. The world was created in 7 days, and they're asking us to describe it in 15 minutes. That obviously is quite a task, but I will speak to certain bullet points, and perhaps we'll get to the bottom of what we want to do today. I have two notions in my submission. The objective of gathering Africans to collectively focus on all positive aspects of African development. And the second one is the absolute need for Africans to seriously examine the current place of Africa in world affairs. Now, I am not going to do this on my own. I am counting on the analysis to be further guided by two authoritative sources, Kofi Annan and Shannon Debib. In the event you want to know who these people are, let me just, Kofi Annan to describe to you, but maybe you want to know Shannon Debib. He is Lieutenant Colonel Shannon Debib, currently serving as the Senior Africa Analyst, Office of the United States Army Deputy Chief of Staff Intelligence, a graduate of the United States Military Academy, West Point, and lives in Angola. Now, I want to bring Lieutenant Colonel Debib together with Kofi Annan. The Gambia is an example of strides that African countries have made. Let us take items like boys in school, establishment of a university, meeting the Millennium Development Goals, the Vision 2020, promoting religious tolerance, empowering women, on a list of other items indicative of policy directions towards development. But the African Progress Panel, the APP chaired by Kofi Annan himself, says significant progress, as a matter of fact confirms the fact that significant progress in improved governance and sustainable democracies, countries have increased their revenue base and have used more of these resources to meet the cost of economic development. Civil society is playing the important role in holding governments accountable. The APP report also says that more work has to be done. There are setbacks in elections in some of these countries, and that has been very disappointing. Some countries are still yet to move to become healthy functioning democracies, as other parts of Africa experience terrible and violent conflict, as well as economic and social chaos. So that's Kofi Annan speaking for you. Shannon Debib has written in Africa Security and Development in the 21st Century, and he emphasizes, and this is where the conversation becomes very interesting, that the necessary precursor to sustainable development, which we are all interested in, is sustainable security. And he says most of the time we are busy talking about sustainable development, and sustainable security is an issue that we are yet to grapple with. One thing is certain, for Africa in the 21st century, its strategic importance in the world will continue to climb. This Afro-pessimism business has an element of misunderstanding about it. There are reasons such as resources, markets, continued concerns over weak governance, allowing for a host of international challenges, terrorism being amongst them. What is uncertain for Africa is at what pace and consistency the continent will be able to control its own destiny, rather than to be subject to the ebb and flow of foreign interests. Now let us pay attention and begin to underline. Now that we understand that, let us now try to ask the prime question. What is the current place of Africa in the world? That is the Africa we are talking about is the Africa that has had an experience over centuries. Economy and governance have been remotely controlled. Therefore, our mentality over a period have become the mentality designed by the victim experience. That mentality that tells us, that gives us the resignation, which contributed to the last century being a completely lost one for Africa. There's nothing Africa can speak about that probably will mark success, milestones during the 20th century. Therefore, Africans must rise to claim the 21st century. That is the exercise for the future. The rise and the claim. But how can that ever happen while the African puts other issues above Africanness? We are very quickly Northerners, we are very quickly Southerners, we are very quickly tribes, Muslim, Christian. We are proud nationals first before we are Africans. The African therefore exists only in geocentric terms. This accident that we all find ourselves on one mass of continent. Now, that has to be broken down. Africa must learn from the Chinese example. China has become a first world power, the first world power. The robust Chinese identity behind the people's emergence in the shifting the global power standings is very important in determining the success of China having overtaken European, Western countries. What are the prospects for the 21st century? We must begin to understand, as a matter of fact, bring it to the front burner, that the game, political and social, economic, cannot continue to be played with the same rules as we've done thus far. The economic relationship between ourselves and the world is wrong. The economic relationship between ourselves within our own indigenous African situation is wrong. We must begin with that premise. Africa must once again assume the determination for self-control and the kind of pride and urgency that led us to Addis Ababa in 1963 and to Cairo in 1964. Our founding fathers were aware and spoke very clearly what Continental Union meant. Continental Union, Unified Central Army Command, and an African Central Bank. Those were clear issues in Cairo. Those were clear issues in Addis Ababa. These were firm hints to you and I that the founding fathers understood that governance, security, and economy were central to any African renaissance. The African cannot therefore seize the 21st century unless the means of shedding the deliberate policies that have refused to teach us production and limited our expertise to labor and trading, while the decisions that spun the world were being taken by the agents of production, those with agricultural and industrial capital. African labor must supply African factories that must spin the fabrics. African universities must supply African industry. African inventors must get about creating, patenting, and sharing blueprints. Industrial Africa must be charting the way forward and leading the production, manufacturing, and pricing of consumables that can make life rich and livable for the African. There must be a redefinition of development away from this capitalist paradigm of understanding of development as massive wealth creation and consumption. We must begin to look towards more humane and service sharing and the presentation of and the preservation of the dignity of human and of society. I don't need to go through the litany of troubles: looming food crisis, floods, drought, attributable to climate change and reckless human behavior, external as well as domestic debt, deforestation, the social malaise of state and personal corruption. All those things erode all the gains we can ever make in Africa. Therefore, Kofi Annan was very sound with the stance he made. Kofi Annan not only looked at African corruption, Kofi Annan spoke to the West. Kofi Annan addressed the G8 nations and said they must take serious action to stop corruption by European and American businesses in Africa. The ease with which foreign companies compromise our leaders and state officials is one of the biggest issues undermining good governance in Africa. And a worse offshoot, of course, is the agencies peddling armaments and illicit drugs. The onslaught is damaging, of course, to our mind, our body, our communities.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. The world was created in 7 days. I'm supposed to describe it in 5 minutes. All right. Let me just rush through here and say there is a genuine worry because the preoccupation with the issues that leave the environment unprepared. Governments won't leave office, even when they lose confidence in the people at the ballot box. They refuse to go and would rather slaughter suffering citizens to perpetuate their rule or arrange power sharing. There's genocide going on within our borders and atrocities take place, and this is the beautiful way in it Kofi Annan puts it. A genocide begins with the killing of just one man, not for what he has done, but for who he is. A campaign of ethnic cleansing begins with one neighbor turning on another neighbor. That is the reason why I am campaigning and I'm asking civil society to campaign across Africa for governments of the African Union to ratify the protocol on the African Human Rights Court. There's justification for that, because we are basing the justification for the Human Rights Court on the performance of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, returning peace to Rwanda and light tracts of the Great Lakes area following the arrest of 82 out of 92 people indicted for war crimes and genocide. Beebe gives us this little, as a matter of fact, succinct view into why sustained security is important for us. And perhaps that's where I should round up, and maybe somebody will ask me a question and I will elaborate. Collective populations living in fear for their immediate safety have little time or motivation to think about longer-term consequences. People living under the threat of death from violence, disease or other factors concentrate specifically on tactical level survival for that single day. Over a long term, those populations mortgage their future, sustainable development for survival today. These people destroy their natural environment for immediate resource requirements, pollute or deplete water resources, go for years without formal education, making them more susceptible to recruitment into local militias, gangs, transnational criminal organizations, or terrorist groups, while they remain outside the possibilities of global market connections. That is what we are seeing all over Africa, north, west, south, and central. Because you raise a people and you give them nothing to do. The environment and sustainable development is not their issue. Their issue is how to meet today to wait for tomorrow. And if somebody puts an AK-47 in my hand and says, look, I will give you $20, massacre, I probably will massacre. That is what Bibb is arguing. That is the picture of the baggage with which Africa goes into the 21st century. We must continue thinking very closely about that.
This is perhaps the most difficult task I have to perform tonight, being the almost second to last speaker, having listened to these erudite scholars, and indeed having even listened to my elder brother, who is Alhaji Taal. This afternoon I told my younger brother, say, oh, Omar, I'm not sure whether he's here. I just said, I'm just going to go out there and listen to my elder brother talk, and when he's finished, I'll just tear him apart. And Omar said, I dare you to do that. And my younger daughter said, Daddy, when you go there, please don't say anything controversial, because I get very worried. So I said, no, another way I'm going to approach it is this. I'm going to go out there and tell them that I'm not going to spend 2 weeks or so writing a paper and they give me 15 minutes. I'm just going to talk as long as I like. Because I think it's just so unfair to have a 27-page document on Pan-Africanism, which is so rich. And I'm asked to read it or to talk about it in 15 minutes. But nonetheless, I can assure you that I'll try and stick to the time, and I will not bore you with reading this paper. First of all, I'd like to say that the paper is an advocacy for the revival of Pan-Africanism, because I am concerned about Pan-Africanism. I wrote this paper originally, and it's been published, it's in the net, and the first caption was Pan-Africanism, an ideology in a state of suspended reality. I chose that catching title because I think that in the last 40 years, this ideology really has not been put into practice. That we have paid too much lip service to Pan-Africanism, but we haven't tried to implement it. Therefore, it's like one of those ideologies that has been put in such an abstract situation that we are not living Pan-Africanism, and we should live Pan-Africanism. That is why in this paper, I try to survey the canonical works of the Pan-Africanists, for those who do not know the origins of this ideology, because this ideology was originally developed from the diaspora, from people who have experienced slavery, people who have lost their contact with Africa, people who have been uprooted from this continent, and they've always been looking back for this lost paradise. They need to go back to their roots. They need to go back to where they came from. As a result of this, the canons of Pan-Africanism emerged from the diaspora. And it is from there that we Africans pick up the ideology and push it as a liberation ideology. This is what we need to know. Really, this is what we need to know. I would like to look at, first of all, where we should pay respect to the foreign people. I would like to quote the works of Martin R. Delaney, Alexander Cromwell, C.R.L. James, Edward Brydon, George Padmore, W.E. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, and Kwame Nkrumah. These are the people, the founding fathers of Pan-Africanism. We have to pay regard to the founding fathers of Pan-Africanism. I would like to look at the works and their legacies. Martin Delaney, a Pan-Africanist, was born in 1812 and died in 1885. He was born in southern United States but grew up in Pennsylvania. Delaney was such a Pan-Africanist that he named his two children after Toussaint Louverture and Ramses II. For those who do not know Toussaint Louverture, he led the first independence revolution for the liberation of Haiti. And today, Haiti is back into the limelight, where our brothers and sisters have suffered a devastating calamity, and we must not forget them. That is one of the origins, that is the land where Toussaint Louverture rebelled against the French and became the first black republic in the whole world. And I think we must remember that. Alexander Cromwell, he visited Liberia in 1859. That's 1859 when slavery was not even yet abolished, and wrote a book, The Future of Africa, published in 1862. In 1862, Africans in the diaspora were writing about the future of Africa. I mean, this is what we must know, that what connects us is our long desire to come back together. And I congratulate the Roots Festival for bringing us back together. We are now reviving Pan-Africanism. This gathering is a Pan-Africanist gathering. It's a Pan-Africanist. I would like to also quote some of the works. In fact, I would like to just mention some of the works of Du Bois, such as The Conservation of Race. And in his book, Souls of Black Folks, published in 1903, Du Bois included a section on Cromwell himself. So we must know the literature. If we do not know the canonical works of the Pan-Africanists, we cannot appreciate the nature of this ideology as a liberation ideology. Pan-Africanism is a liberation ideology. We have to liberate ourselves, not only physically, but mentally. Who are we? We are a race of people with a common destiny from a common origin. That's the importance of this ideology. And you must remember other Pan-Africans like Edward Wilmot Blyden. Blyden was born in the United States. Blyden influenced people like Cyril James. Blyden influenced Marcus Garvey. Blyden influenced Kwame Nkrumah. Blyden influenced Cheikh Anta Diop. Blyden started the movement back to Africa, to Liberia. And yet he was a priest. He established schools. He escaped the US when the fugitive slave laws were passed in September 1850, and came and settled in Liberia and became a nationalist leader in Liberia, just next door in Monroe, just around the corner here. Indeed, latter-day Pan-Africanists, latter-day black nationalists such as Dr. Carmichael, Rab Brown, and others gave inspiration from the works of Blyden, a 19th century Pan-Africanist. I think it's important we know, because we said if we don't know where we are from, we really wouldn't know where we are going. That's the whole importance of roots. Where are we from? I mean, when I run into a brother and sister from the States or from the diaspora, I do not see an American, I see an African. I just came back from Dakar from the FESMAN, from the African River Festival, and I met up with the son of Marcus Garvey, Dr. Garvey from New York. I was absolutely amazed. I met him with this Cheikh Mbake Diop, the son of Cheikh Anta Diop. When we were in Dakar, we saw ourselves as a united race of people who are oppressed, people who are oppressed because of our color, for nothing else, because of our origin. We should not suffer or be punished because of our Negroness. This is who we are. And indeed, I do believe that the destiny of this world is in the hands of the black race. And we must never forget that. This world is our world. And the people still wonder why we suffer. It's because we have not been listening to each other. We have not been looking at our own potentials. We do not need people to come and help us anymore. We have black inventors. We have black discoverers, we have black academics, we have black scientists, we have black people going to the moon. The conveyor belt was discovered by a black man in America. I think we should do some history of the black discoveries so that we will know what we have contributed to scientific development of the world. In fact, without the black man, the United States would not have been where it is today. That's a historical fact. To me, being an African and a black man for that matter is something that I am proud of. I am proud of it because I know where I am from. When I look at the works of Saja Job on the origins and myths of African civilization, and I look at myself as an original Egyptian, I know where I am from because I am one of the originators of modern civilization. I'm one of the originators of the civilizations of the world. When I look at the concepts like barbarism and civilization, I look at that there was no barbarism in my civilization. It has never been barbaric. In fact, we suffer because of our humanity, not our barbarism. The world has a lot to learn from us, and we must never underestimate who we are. If they are inheritors of this world today, it is us. The future is in the hands of the black man. I thank you very much.
So he already wrapped up his contribution, but I can, as I say, I've got a promise for all of you distinguished ladies and gentlemen, but I will disclose that later. My next contributor, I wouldn't say my last contributor. Let me announce your topic. Dr. Tangara has chosen.
Thank all the panelists and all the invited guests. And to tell you that I'm standing here not as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, but as a free intellectual who will speak his mind. And I know my team will be worried because they prepare a statement for me. The statement is still on the table. And I also want to seize this opportunity to thank Mr. Marcel Tomasi, because what he did not tell you that is when we were working together at the European Commission Support Unit, he was one of my mentors. And I remember when I got frustrated with the system and I decided to leave, despite the amount of money I was receiving, I wanted to write a bitter letter. And people were encouraging me, and I was playing the hero. And I say in that letter, I will clearly say that these people are promising the moon, but the same people are coming back telling us that the moon is made of green cheese. But then Marcel called me in the office and closed the door and said, Mamadou, what do you want to do? When I told him about my ideas, he said, Mamadou, you know what? You are young, your future is ahead of you. Don't start a war. I don't have doubts that you will win. Maybe you will win this battle, but you will never win the war. Thank you, Marcel, for that invaluable advice. You know, I decided to put aside this paper because sometimes I tend to have a completely different view with others. I'm just coming from Addis, where the theme of the ordinary session is shared values. And I kept on asking myself, what values are we going to share? Because if you look at ourselves, all the values we have are foreign to us. Those who went to the Francophone, the French educational system, those who went to the English educational system, we have a tendency to look at ourselves from others, with the eyes of others. And you know, in Wolof they say, Kula abal bot, the whole fumbuga. If someone help you to translate that.
Someone who lends you eyes, you will look to the direction that he intends.
Okay. So I refuse to look at myself with the eyes of others. And I think one thing that is important is to look at our history and compare it with the history of Haitians. You know, they suffer as much as we do, but yet still they've been able to get out of this vicious cycle of underdevelopment, because they've put emphasis on science and technology, yes, but culture occupies a pride of place in their development process. And I think that's how we can liberate ourselves from this vicious cycle of underdevelopment. Because if we look at all the enterprises that aims at exploiting people, before engaging in the gruesome activities, they will come up with ideology that will justify what they are doing. I just want to take you back to history.
maybe many of you know about. Have you ever heard about the controversy of Valladolid? The controversy of Valladolid. That was a debate between two famous philosophers, one called Luis de Sepulveda and Bartolome de las Casas. And it was organized by the Vatican. Because slavery started with the Red Indians. But when they realized that most of these Red Indians were dying like flies, they decided to invite the Vatican to see, because the justification of slavery was that these people are not human beings. So you cannot bring the light of Jesus Christ to them. And the debate in Valladolid in Spain between Sepulveda and Bartolome de las Casas, Bartolome de las Casas was defending the fact that these people are human beings like you and me. So we can bring the light of Jesus Christ to them. And Sepulveda was adamant that these people are not human beings. So you cannot bring the light of Jesus Christ to them. So they said that, well, let's bring the Vatican to have a verdict on this issue. But Sepulveda's contention was that, the difference between human beings and animals is the capacity to laugh. And this Indian, they cannot even laugh. So they decided to bring clowns and people cracking jokes, but the Indians were there standing, not responding. He said, you see, they cannot even laugh. And when I look at that, I remember I was invited to watch a movie at the French Cultural Center. And people were laughing, but I was not laughing. I would laugh after seeing people laughing, because I was laughing at those who were laughing. Because for me, there was nothing funny anyway. So, at some point in time, the man who came from the Vatican wanted to go down the stairs, and he nearly fell down. And then the Indian started laughing. He said, you see, they are laughing. That was the contention of the position of Bartolome de las Casas. So they were trying to see whether someone can testify to the fact that they were laughing. Actually, they were laughing. And that's how they decided to recognize that these people are human beings. But when they decided to stop the slavery to take the Indians as slaves, they decided to move to Africa because these people are stronger. So Bartolome de las Casas saved the Red Indians, but our misfortune started with him. And even with slavery, some people, in order to justify it, use the logical thinking of framework of Aristotle with a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. I will give you an example. If you say, what's your name, madam?
Kenel.
Huh?
Kenel.
Kenel. Kenel, all human beings are mortal. Kenel is a human being, therefore Kenel is a mortal. Logic. If you so follow the major premise, the minor premise, and the conclusion. So they say, all human beings are made in the image of God. God, as everybody knows, is not a Negro. Therefore, the Negro is not a human being. So, for them, the justification was there for them to say that we can reduce them to the status of slaves. And if you look at the history of Africa itself, Conrad said that the main the main reason for colonial enterprise is the tearing of treasures out of the bowel of the lands. But for them to justify that too, you need to say that Africans are not civilized. So we are bringing the light of civilization to them. But we all know that the underhand motive is to plunder the resources of Africa. And I think some people will think that maybe it's not even important, it's just a mere waste of time to dwell on this kind of view. But I think it's very important, because not long ago, a serving president, European president, said that Africans have not entered into history. Yeah. And unfortunately, I was very sad to see that even during the AU summit, the same president was invited to come and talk to Africans. Because of the fact that, as I said, for us to be accepted, we think that we have to get the sanction of Europe or other people. Yeah. And I think that's where the statement of our president is really very important, when he is saying that we don't want to be followers. Because when you follow people, you are always behind them. Yeah. And we don't want to be behind anybody. So, and that's why the good thing that he has achieved with the revolution is the Gambia, that we've started looking ourselves from our own eyes, from our own perspective. And whether people like the way we're moving, we'll continue moving slowly but surely towards development. If they are pleased, well and good. If they are not happy, that's their problem. It does not matter. And he always reminds us that, you know, Africa is one of the richest continents. But how can you explain the fact that the people of the richest continent are the poorest? Just because of ignorance. And I think one of the panelists raised it here. You know, countries that are endowed with resources, while they will make sure that we started, well, one thing that they succeeded in doing is with the divide and ut regness policy, to divide and rule, is for us to start identifying ourselves as Francophones, Anglophones, forgetting that the most important thing is that we are Africans, and we should put emphasis on things that will bring us together. And if you look at the continent, countries that are endowed with resources, people are killing each other. And whilst they are killing each other, I will just take the example of Sierra Leone. When they were killing each other, a group of mercenaries called the Executive Outcomes were protecting the diamond mines. And we were killing each other. So I think the president is more than right when he's saying that the worst virus, disease that we are suffering from in Africa is ignorance. Yeah. And as long as we serve foreign interests, there is no way we can get out of this vicious circle, because they will always use us against each other. And even in the field of knowledge, even the syllabi that are being taught in our schools, we rely on foreign expertise to come and draw our syllabi for us. Of course, we all know everything about Western kings, queens, about Western concepts, but little do we know about ourselves. And that's why I was really very happy. For the PhD for me is not very important. The most important thing for me is that it has enabled me to rediscover myself, because I was talking to people who have never been to any university. But what I've realized is that they are more knowledgeable than people in universities. And these are the people they call the Silatigis in the Mandinka city. They know about them. They say they plant seeds of light to illuminate our journey throughout life. They give you the tools to appreciate yourself, things that you will encounter in your day-to-day life. And semiology, that will sound very complex. But if you talk to these people, they are semioticians without knowing that even they are semioticians. They know even more than the semioticians like Umberto Eco and others. And coming back to the educational system, I think one of the citadels that we must storm, if we want to get out of this vicious circle, is the school system. I think that's more than important. I don't know whether you've heard about an intellectual called Capitan. He wrote the book called Dissertatio da Servitude. In that book, he was trying to justify slavery. He's a black man, but educated and brought up by white people who try to put in him that it's compatible to be Christian and own slaves. And he ended up becoming the voice of the masses. And unfortunately, even with independence, most of our leaders are even worse than the form of colonial masters. Because as any good collaborators, sometimes they are even more wicked than their masters. And those who try to say that they were trying to liberate us from this cultural yoke, people like Senghor. But Senghor, with the negritude theory, telling me that reason is Greek and emotion is black, I don't see what kind of, from where he's talking, but that I found it very difficult to understand it. And one thing I know is that Senghor himself knew Africa through people like Leo Frobenius, who is a German ethnographer. So there is not much he can tell us about Africa. And defining saying that the way I think depend on the color of my skin is completely foolish, because, in 5 minutes. Because if you have twins and one is brought up in the Gambia, the other one in, I don't know, Russia, they will, though they are black, they will think in a completely different way. So my way of thinking depends on the environment and the circumstances, but not because it has nothing to do with the color of my skin. And I always, and this time around I will make sure that you get a copy, I always also remind Africans that even in terms of human rights and good governance, Bakari Sidibe is here. In Kabu, you have a limitation of term. A ruler cannot rule for more than 7 years. Bakari, am I right? Yeah. And it rotates. And when we talk about human rights also, I always remind people of the Charter of Kurukanfuga. I will make sure that you get a copy of the Charter. I promise people, but I never give it to them. But this time around, we'll make a copy available to you, where you have 44 articles abolishing slavery, talking about environment, about everything. And that was in the 13th century, well before the Universal Declaration of 1789. And it's here from Africa, from Mandi, during the time of Sunjata Keita. You also have the Ethiopian Fita Neges. And even in Ethiopia, I was talking to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, asking him whether they have a copy of the Fita Neges. He was telling me, I know about it, but I will make sure that you get it. But even Ethiopians don't know about the Fita Neges, and that's the basis of the Ethiopian constitution. So we need to know more about ourselves. So if we want to share values, let's go and learn more about ourselves, then we can start sharing. And sometimes also they say that, well, since we don't write our history, we have forgotten everything. It's completely wrong. When they say scripta manent, verba volent, words fly and writings remain. In an African context, that's a hypothesis that does not hold water. And that's why I want the griot to play the tune of Chedo.
Kedo kana majo bang, kedo kana majo, kedo kabur kana majo. Malambe dolovina, sara ni mane rumoriyata.
You know? You listen to this tune, it's not only mere music. Huh? You want him to play again? No, we are coming to that. Exactly, you see? He does not even know what it is about.
We have guests that they would not like.
No, but I would want you to explain it.
But I was just telling Luciano here, it's a song meant for great audience. And that's the Saja, the Manje,
I'm sure that in this hall, only you have to deserve it. Knowledge is not given to anybody. When you deserve it, you will get it. And the tune that he is playing is loaded. Any tune and any word in this song is loaded. You can write a whole book about it. It's about the aristocrats of the last animist empire of Kabu. Maybe I will allow Sidibe to talk about it. Because people tend to take me as the expert on Kabu. But I always tell them that Sidibe is the giant. I'm the dwarf standing on the shoulders of Sidibe. It's important that what matters most is our capacity to solve our problems using African solutions to African problems, not relying on others. Because how many summits have they organized making pledges about Africa, but we've never seen the color of the money. So they are talking about donor fatigue, but we have a pledges fatigue. We don't want, if I have any power, I will even say that in the next summit, let them not even mention Africa. Thank you very much.
Inviting me to say a few words in the seminar. I was pleased to hear various things said about Gambian African and Gambian culture. And we are witnessing here the concern of the place of Africa and the African in the 21st century. I don't know really where to start. Perhaps I should start with the request that the Honorable Minister has made to me to explain what Cheddar is about. The importance of trying to establish African culture and identity in the 21st century is a very relevant and a very important one, because it concerns our identity, it concerns our pride. For the last 25 to 30 years, I have been involved in this particular field of work, trying to establish African culture so that Africans could realize that they have a culture that they can be proud of. When we talk about literature, we talk about literature which Africans have, which can be compared with literature, with European literature. Everything you find in European literature is present in African literature as well. We find this, and I made it my responsibility to travel and collect from oral historians, from performers like this one here, to record what they can remember about the history of their people. And what I have recorded is massive. Over 5,000 cassettes of recordings are now deposited and stored in the depository of the National Council for Arts and Culture. One of the areas that I studied very strongly was the Empire of Cabo. When we consider the Empire of Ghana, of Mali, and of other empires, we see the areas these empires occupied and administered were very vast, very large, consisting of various ethnic groups living together and working in the separate areas harmoniously, without the troubles that we are experiencing in various places in Africa today. This is commendable. We seem to have gone back because we are not establishing and strengthening the experiences we gained from our forefathers, which is a pity. When the migration happened within the Cabo area, they established an empire which tried, as the Honorable Minister has indicated, to rotate rulership between families in the Cabo area, not keeping power in the hands of one clan or one area. it was important for those people that you should rule and you should establish good governance during the period of your rule, so that people would speak about you, you would achieve things that you would be proud of. They did not amass wealth. Most of the leaders of Cabo were like ordinary men. In fact, most people dressed better than them. They did not amass wealth. Anyone who studied those people could verify that. They moved to the North Bank and established a state called Sin. The people of Sin, the clan members of Sin, are the ones we call Chedos. We call the Kabungas Nyanchos or Korings, the ruling class, the political class, but in the Senegal area, they are called Chedos, and they ruled Sin and later Salom. President Senghor was particularly concerned about the history of this area and to show the connection between the Kingdom of Sin and Salom, to show the relationship, how the relationship was maintained. So indeed, we are all aware of successive changes in the course of history from the 15th to the 20th century. We have now to recapitulate in order to discern the nature of this and effect of these changes, to see if the changes that affected us kept us backward and continued to suppress the interest of Africans, then we, especially the intellectuals, would be in a position to know this and be in a position to try to change the situation. Africa is indispensable to humanity because of the various contributions and vast potential of human, material, and moral resources. We have seen that Africans have sympathy and understanding to excess, which we can and are, sort of sending out to the world. Yet history has always been impelled by external forces, a typical example of which is the transatlantic slave trade. Everything that we sort of get into is changed and diverted to fit the interest of the white man. Given our present level of intellectual, cultural, and moral resources, we are in a position to shape our own future. We should not allow this sort of situation to continue. And here again, we have to appeal to our intellectuals, our politicians, and others to recognize those changes that are harmful, that are detrimental to the progress of the African nation, African people, and to do something about it. Western education has almost completely supplanted the ways in which our ancestors used to train their kids. we have heard from our first speaker how education should be directed. I had the good fortune to work as a teacher and to study linguistics for a bit. And when I came back, because I was particularly interested in teaching of the local languages, and I spent 3 to 4 years experimenting on the teaching of language as a medium of instruction to schools, so that children who come to school are not deprived from thinking in their own languages, from developing their own capacity through the use of their own language to be creative in their own languages. But if they have to learn English from the first day they come into school, most of their thinking is stopped because they have difficulties in expressing themselves in English, and the teachers also try to force them to speak in the English language. So when I opened my experimental school, I taught English as a second language so that they could learn to speak the language separately, but their reading and writing and everything else, their storytelling and everything else was done in the vernacular. And I found that they were able to cover the 6 years course within a matter of 2 years. This fact can be verified by asking people who knew about that experiment. So it is possible to promote education through the language, through the local languages. But it is difficult because most of the parents are already suspicious of sending their sons to school and hearing them learn their own native language. They would rather they learn to read and write in English.
The Gambia Tourism Authority. I have 2 questions for Mr. Johnson and the other one for the Alhaji Taal. My first question goes to Honorable Johnson. As someone who I understood to have lots of experience in the media, I wanted to say something, and that is probably because of the category of the panelists in terms of age, that I have not heard anything about the role of the media, the realities on the ground today, the internet, the satellite systems we put in at home for our children. How will this affect the notion that you guys are trying to put to us, that our culture, our ways of doing things in the past is far superior to the existing ones that they want us to believe? I doubt it if...
Okay. Asked it. Well, of course, you understand that technology, the stage of development of technology in the West has a whole lot to do with the educational culture that has developed. Because it has come through Western education, Western enterprise, Western science, it seems as if it's a Western issue. But the technology we have to depend on, the technology that we need to make the world a safer place, The technology we need to make the world a more civilized place is not necessarily a Western concept. It comes from education, and it is for us to harness that kind of education that can give us room to participate in determining the shape and culture of what we want technology to be, what we want media to be, how we want media to serve us. The reason it looks as if it's outside our purview is because we have had nothing to do with it. We have not sent satellites up into space. We have not been involved in the technology. As a matter of fact, if you look at the profile of Sheikh Keita, is it Keita? I can Google and look for the name. This great Malian scientist who is with NASA. He is mentoring he's mentoring a group of African scientists, young African scientists, through his website, for them to participate. That it is science is not a Western thing. It is controlled by the West simply because of the educational culture that has developed towards increasing the knowledgeability and control of technology.
To Honorable Minister Tangara as Minister of Foreign Affairs, what would you believe are the correct channels to transmit the African message and African culture to Europe and the US?
We are in the digital age through the internet, and in fact, even in preserving our culture, we can use the new technology, because when we look at the number of cassettes collected by Bakary Sidibe and the condition in which they are today, if we don't digitalize it, we are going to lose all of them. And I had the opportunity to visit Bayreuth in Germany, where you have one of the best centers. Where you have one of the best centers in African studies. I mean, today, even if you want to do proper research about Africa, you have to go to the West. And if you are lucky to visit SOAS, you have a room where it is marked for reference only. Please do not remove from this room. So even our own knowledge is today in the hands of the West. So there is no way you can do proper research here without going to the West. So there is a need to collaborate and work with them. And I think we must consider ourselves also very lucky. Apart from the fact that we have our African culture, we know more about Europe than actually Europe knows about Africa. So I think that's also a great advantage. We're not trying to work in isolation, but we'll definitely have to work with Europe because they have the technology, and we are in the same boat together. Thank you.
Materials and information available in the West. Just if you take, for instance, the Gambia Echo, which was a newspaper before independence in the 40s, early 40s, run by the late Landy Peters Sr., that is the father of Dr. Landy Peters. When we go to the Gambia National Archives, what you have is just the first part of the Gambia Echo. The rest is now in London, in UK, in northern part of London, a British newspaper library in Colindale. So what they have in the UK is not available in the Gambia, and vice versa. It is as if the materials have been divided into two. So it means if you want to have a complete information of the Gambia Echo, which was published in the Gambia by governments here in the Gambia, you must go to the UK. So this is one of the challenges that Africans need to do, and they've gone that far to put the materials they have in microfilms, so that at least it can be preserved for many, many, many years. Whereas in some certain situations, we're finding it difficult to maintain some of the stuff. Even some of the newspapers at times, we don't see the value. Later on, we'll need to go back to the information that was published and then discover that they were thrown away or used to buy peanuts. Sorry for that.
I am a political science student at the University of the Gambia. My question goes to Dr. Taal. You did mention earlier that the life of this world is in the hands of black. How is that possible? How can we inflict that kind of concept in the minds of black? Whilst we are seeing we always having the concept that America is the superpower or all other European countries. How can we put that in the minds of Africans that we are the superpower? Thank you.
Question. For a start, civilization and human development is based on the availability of water. Without water, there can be no survival, and Africa has the largest water resource in the whole world. So really, the future of the world depends on water. Secondly, I think that in the next 30 years, we will have a nuclear war in the West and also in America. So the only place left to migrate will be in Africa. That's the only place we left. So keep an eye on it. Partly, I think you have to look at the nature of human history. Civilizations come and go, and each one has had their own fair share. The European civilization is virtually ending and is being taken over by the Asiatic civilization. That will also go for a while and will end. And the final civilization is the African civilization. So I think we will be the last one to carry humanity to a peaceful end. That is my premise of the future.
This is more like an observation than a question, really. I just want to commend you all, members of the panel, for your contribution. In sitting here, I've learned a lot. And I just want to say, technology, God has given us humanity and insight into development. And as His Majesty says, we have to work with technology, we can't fight it. But I think we have to find a way to harness and to guide our children especially, and to safeguard them. Because here we have now, technology has afforded the opportunity of all different ideologies to be in our houses, in our homes, to the exposure for children. And this is where we have to always safeguard ourselves, our people, our nation. And as a conscious-minded nation, we need to protect our children. Because you have the hip-hop culture coming in, the gangsterology, the gunology, all different things coming in through. And in the West, we find that because as a member, as a survivor from the African diaspora, the history and the story and the news that they give us in the West is that Africa is downtrodden. My comment here is proof to the people. I have news to tell them that Africa is on the rising. And as I always say, the unification of our people, great minds, great philosophers, we're all here. All we need is the unity of our great people that we can build this time.
I would like to know, I don't really know who to direct this question to, so, but when I throw it, maybe somebody can pick it up. Why is it that we Africans cannot be united in purpose and achieve our objectives? The reason I say that is...
please ask your question. Don't explain your question. The panel understands.
No, they might not understand where I'm coming from. So that's why I want to say where I'm coming from. I'm referring to Pan-Africanism, and ECOWAS and whatnot in Africa. The 11 concepts which form the AU today were formulated by Nkrumah and now picked up by the West, and today EU is in effect, but Africa is still lagging behind. So I want to know, why is it that we are lagging behind in terms of implementing our objectives? Thank you.
We know each other since we are little children, and we always talk about why is it that we are not united up till now. I think that we have a psychological problem. It's not physical. The problem is colonialism is the greatest damage that has happened to our psyche. We are still colonized mentally to the point that we cannot push ahead. We have to decolonize our minds. Like I said, in Africa, even the animals have a right to move from one country to another. But here we need to cross borders and even have visas to go across. It is because our minds are still colonized. There's a storybook on Prospero and Caliban. In Prospero and Caliban, the idea is that the colonized man doesn't know his fitness. He complains about headache, not knowing that he has a high blood pressure. He complains about indigestion, not knowing that he is suffering from diarrhea. So we have a problem of what is actually wrong with us. That's why I think that to move ahead in order to be a united nation of African people, we have to redefine ourselves in our own terms. That's the problem. We are allowing other people to define us. We must stop being defined and we define ourselves. When we have this common definition of who we are, then unity will be something that will be easily achievable. I think it's lack of knowing who we are. That is why we are not yet united. I thank you.
I tried to show my people some of the deficiencies which in fact impact on our inability to integrate. But because of time, we could not go into detail. But let me say this. The problem of unification and the problem of integration and the problem of people knowing and living together is the problem of the Western elite. It's the educated people from France, Francophones, or Hispanophones, or Anglophones who have a problem. You had the anecdote I read about these people.
I just had to ask one question. You say that Africa can unite and we can go forth and become one and it's the new superpower. But how can that be so when we're still letting Western powers buy our land, buy our people, buy our resources, and we still read on that Western colonization which we face today? So how can we become a united Africa and the Africa that's moving forward if we're still allowing China, England, and also Brazil to buy land from us, to buy our water, to buy our crops, and to buy our people through their colonial ways?
Professor Tangara, thank you very much for appealing on my behalf. That's the bond between a teacher and a student. It's a pleasure being here, and I noticed some people are dozing.
Can you ask your question, please?
Very good. The question is this. Dr. Tangara talked about culture as a springboard to emancipation. And I want to add sustainable development. The question is, the world is a global village, and information technology is the way as we speak. What can we in the media do to blend the culture that is practiced in our own villages, in our own localities, for the outside world? Because I know the European media is using their media.
I am satisfied you have asked your question. I'll ask Mr. Nanagrejo.
In fact, by somebody on the side here. If we must wade into media, we must be able to control the information we put out. If we design the information we put out, we must be able to control the medium through which it goes to reach our people. Now, with the situation of technology, the high cost and the science, the control of the science behind it, seems at the moment outside our purview, outside our control. And then I said in answering that question, we do not need to reinvent the wheel. We do not need an African syringe. The syringe that is puncturing backsides in Europe can puncture our backsides here for good effect. We do not have to have new buttons or new cars, whatever, maybe more efficient cars, yes. But the concept of public transport is already there. What we have to do is to harness that technology and give it that value system that will make it, that will reflect our African ethos. That is what I'm saying. And if you look at it, we must, if we are moving away from it, they accuse Obama of being a socialist. Why do they accuse Obama of being a socialist? Because it says the guy sleeping under the bridge must also have insurance. He's a socialist for wanting to provide for somebody sleeping under the bridge. He says you sleep in your castle in Malibu, California, and the guy sleeping under the Brooklyn Bridge. You are Americans and entitled to all the benefits that all Americans are entitled to. He is creating the perspective that is saying we need to harness it for everybody. Now, we need to harness technology to serve our purposes. And if we do not control the science, we do not control the education. We need laboratories. China closed the borders. What you're seeing in China today came from the revolutionary thinking of Mao Zedong, who said for China to develop, you had to have a Chinese identity, you had to close the borders. And the methods that, I'm not saying the methods that Mao Zedong used are to be espoused, but the idea of the identity, the proud Gambian, the proud Kenyan, you look at the Francophone countries, what they do to everything that is established on the Anglophone side. Every time you have, anytime you have a West African, an ECOWAS situation, it is Francophone, it is Anglophone. France organizes a little Francophone club on the side. You have this group and that group, and there is always a Francophone version of whatever is Anglophone that is an integrated, that looks like an organization to integrate the economic or social or educational structures that we have.
Gaëla, merci.
Nice.
Nice papa.
Yeah, nice na trop.
Li nice na trop.
Salsa bi doy na waar.
Donc ben style par exemple changer un peu dugg ci salsa bi ñëw tamit ci rap bi tombu ñuul la.
waaw mooy tombu ñuul point noir daal maanaam.
Point noir. Alors faites de la musique noo koy dundee.
waaw ñoo ngi koy dundee comme d'habitude rek. xam rek ñëw bégal gars yi.
ayca ñu dem ci plateau bi.
démb la woon tey ñëwagul waaye maslaa tey na flek ak nga jógal jaare tomb ñuul dëggal mataguñu gaagoor teewul ñoo gën a ñàng di jaanu ñàng ngoor dund bu neex ñu sëlëm waaye mënuñu gëlëm ñu dugg si taan bi rek li peeru dërëm ndax lu ñuy yegg si rab bi mënuñu ko denc même bu dee ñaar la te yeggul ñeent di ngeen si ba jëkkati loxo di ngóom ñu aj dinaan rab ba ñun la ngeen fay fekk bu jaboo génne tekk te def du mooy dégg daan ni samp léeg moo ngi fi xawma kañ wante ba si ngeen ñu màggal duñu ay ragal te bay ñu ku ñu gaal doon na lu ñu gëm yëg-yëg si rab bi tax ñu metti lu dofer dem ship gedda moo la dugal si rab bi boo ñu gisee titlu tax doom bu ñuul du seen maas samu rek ba maintenant moo ngi ba ënd yi jaar yoon te du añ mbam ba leen fii jëlee foog nga nangu nigga jëf si ma sa ñoo fii teew foog nga nangu nigga bu ñuul la jënd na maay
ñëwal get bi sam ñëwal get bi sam ñëwal get bi sam
dinaa ñu teewala
ñëwal get bi sam
bu ñuul la jënd na maay
ñëwal get bi sam ñëwal get bi sam ñëwal get bi sam
dinaa ñu teewala
ñëwal get bi sam yow faaw la suñu aat la du gaw a rap la kandi faj tarap la àdduna bi ngay dox fekk na ñu fi bu xas da waayu jarok lëndëm sëlëm ko leer di xeeñ